and welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg. Welcome to season 3, episode 1 of season 3. And we're so glad that you are here. There's like a purpose behind the podcast, if believe it or not. Purpose of the podcast is to talk about those ministries that go on beyond the pulpit. Because you know what? Clergy people, most of them I know actually are really cool people. Seriously. And one of those, see, look, I was going somewhere with this. Yeah, you know my name, blah, blah, blah. One of those cool people is my guest today. Da-da-da-da. All right, drum roll and fanfare, please. Please welcome Reverend Michael Woolf, PhD, Reverend Dr. Michael Woolf. Welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
I know, and I feel terrible, like, that it's taken me this long because your name has actually been on my board, but I just, like, I don't know. I have a little ADD, and sometimes
Well, all things have their appointed season. That's
right.
okay.
So you get to kick off season 3, and so I'm so glad. So I'm gonna assume because, like, not everybody knows everybody. I mean, that there are people that don't know you. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure. So I'm in Evanston, Illinois, and I am the senior minister. I'm the pastor of Lake Street Church of Evanston, and that's a American Baptist congregation here. And I've been here since 2019. And really, the thing that Evanston's really well known for is that it's the first city, the first municipality in the nation to have a reparations program. So reparations conversations really started in Evanston. That's been a big part of my ministry here outside the pulpit. I also did an academic doctorate degree, a PhD, at Harvard Divinity School, and I got to write and think about a lot of cool stuff. And one of the things that I got to do was write this really cool book. It's called Sanctuary and Subjectivity. So that's been a pretty exciting thing. I also teach at Lewis University. I teach theology and do a little writing here and there for places like Sojourners.
When do you sleep?
I sleep
You
really
do a
well at
lot of
night, and I
stuff.
always get 8 to 10. 8 to 10 is
Really?
so I always try to. But I found that since having my daughter, who's 6 years old now, I'm much more productive with the time I have because there's a lot less of it. You become really good at maximizing it. So
Kids will do that to you. They
yeah,
will really do that to you. No
for
kidding.
sure.
Yeah, wow. So is the whole city of Evanston is doing the reparations. Is that right?
Right. So it's based on there's a program, and there's plenty of places to read about this. But it was the first program to launch in the nation, and so it was passed by the city council. It's really the brainchild of one alder person, Robin Rue Simmons, and she's gone on to have a nonprofit that sort of focuses on municipal reparations. But I think they've identified there's definitely over 100 ancestors that will qualify based on housing discrimination redlining, and there have been dozens of payments that have gone out that are tens of thousands of dollars.
So what does that look like for the churches?
Sure. So
And
churches play a big factor in making their neighborhoods, right? So they're pretty. And for us, our story is that we were linked, and we had a racist past, really, and the past based in white supremacy, where a congregation that got started that's now called Second Baptist started at First Baptist, which is what we used to be called. And those black members left First Baptist to form Second Baptist due to segregated seating, lack of opportunities for leadership, and a whole bunch of other things. Just a lack of interest from First Baptist on serving the really growing black community in Evanston. So there was a lot that was going on there. That's part of our story. So part of our reparations is also thinking about that story. But other churches who don't have quite as tangible a narrative, they still played really important roles in making different neighborhoods and in excluding and so they benefited from redlining and participated in redlining, as well as a host of other things. And so a ton of churches and as well as the two synagogues in town are really active, and we have an interfaith clergy group, and we're really active on supporting reparations at the city level, and also diving into some of our stories to try to learn and to contemplate and to work through and make repair out of stories of white supremacy in our past as congregations.
So how long did that start? I didn't remember. Did you
Yeah,
say
so
that?
like it
When was it?
started the year I got into town, so it's been
Okay.
with me basically the entire time, 2019. And so Second Baptist Church has had a sister church relationship with Lake Street for a longer period of time back in the 90s. And so that was a relationship that I didn't form but inherited. And so I got to do this rich partnership with the pastor um, who is uh, who is there at Second Baptist at our sister church. His name's Reverend Dr. Michael Neighbors. And so I got to work with him quite a bit, and getting to work with him has been a real privilege and joy. And, he's taught me a lot. And so I think that's really some benefits that I came into at Lake Street is that they had this rich partnership and this sister church relationship. And also at the same time, building conversations about reparations were happening. So there's a lot of theological work, a lot of work inside congregations and outside the congregations sort of coming together to support reparations.
And is that right that both you and Reverend Neighbors won the Dahlberg
That's
award?
true. Yeah,
Is that right? Did I
that
remember that
that
right?
that is true. Yeah. So we won that award both for the activism we were doing in the city around reparations, and also for working through and thinking about our two congregations story and what that's like. And so one of the things that's happened is there was a there was this real recognition that although uh, the Black members of First Baptist really built and were a part of building and making of the community and of the building that is Lake Street Church of Evanston currently, when they left, they didn't get to take any of that equity with them. So one of the things that's been really
Mm,
important is about restoring Second Baptist to some ownership in this
mm,
building, being able to say that it's not just ours, and trying to articulate we have a shared past that's not so pretty, but can we also have a shared future together as two congregations? And that's
yeah,
always tough work. It's not easy, but I think it's not easy for different reasons for my congregation and his congregation. But it has been, you know, the most fulfilling work that I've ever gotten to do, for sure.
I I love that you're like, so this is who we were, and while we can't go back and change that, we can move forward together to make this different. I mean,
Yeah, so much of this feels like, especially amongst white congregations, which is where I've spent my career, because I am white and I think about whiteness all the time. But the thing
right.
is that people think about talking about the past. And if they talk about racism or if they talk about white supremacy, that it's going to make it worse. That it's just something we can't really fix. It happened in the past. If we just leave it, then perhaps we can go move forward. But really, what happens is when we talk about that and when we commit to making that a part of our story and commit to working through it and making amends, that it actually enables a future to come into view that wouldn't have been there before. And also, uh, it is talking about and wrestling with white supremacy and these stories that are there if you want to look most of the time. The story between our two churches, for instance, is replicated hundreds of times, thousands of times throughout the United States, where there was one church and then there was two, and the reasons for that were white supremacy most of the time, and also a beautiful, wonderful desire for these independent Black institutions to serve their community. That's also part of it too. So it's not all bad reasons, but a lot of the time there is something there. But and really wrestling with that, new futures can be made possible. It's the probably the best thing that can be done, as opposed to pretending so often um, that people and institutions want to pretend like the past didn't happen or it didn't happen that
Yeah,
way or refuse to acknowledge it.
yeah, yeah. I agree. Like like, oh, it won't hurt as much if we just don't talk about it, kind of thing, or it'll just go away if we don't talk about it. But yeah,
Right.
yeah. Uh, so how have things changed since 2019? I mean, your city, your
Well,
church.
I mean,
I
I think
mean,
that everybody who's in ministry is definitely still dealing with the fallout of COVID-19. I think that it did
right.
change how we did things. It made it enabled certain futures for sure, but also took away the past in ways that make it. Um, I don't know. You can't do things the same way you did in 2019, and
Mm,
I think that that's a big adjustment. A lot of people, don't have the same attendance patterns that they did in the past around going to church. I think that that's a big adjustment. So I think the main thing that's changed is that you have to meet people where they are, and try to keep people engaged, even if that's not on a Sunday in person attendance. And so my big thing has been, and this is, people disagree with me all the time. I don't really care how people participate in the life of the church. I don't care how people are affiliated with the church. I don't care how people. I just want engagement. I want people to care that we exist and to engage somehow. And if that means that you watch the Sunday service on Wednesday afternoon when you have time, I'm cool with that. That sounds great. Whatever can happen is good.
yeah, yeah. I love it. Some of the things um, that happened as a result of the pandemic was some of those things that we as pastors really hoped would happen. But without a pandemic, like Zoom
Yeah,
services and that opportunity to watch your church service on a Wednesday afternoon because sometimes it's nice to sleep in, and sometimes it's life just doesn't work the way we want it to work, and you got, you got a kid,
that's
your parent, there's all
for
those
sure.
things that play in there. If I remember right, your church was already like very active in the community before all of that. Is that
Sure,
right?
yeah, so there's some big strengths. I didn't have to do much work to figure out what the church was about. I mean, it's pretty active on justice issues in the community. It's the place where the first and the most important sort of linchpin for suburban North Shore, outside Chicago, homelessness prevention and care for the unhoused is. So there was a homeless shelter that was started in the 1980s, which has a great story. Um, but the homeless shelter that was started in the 1980s in the church basement, and the city council didn't want to approve it. So they had 24-hour prayer services where food and places to sleep would be. So, I mean, I think there's a real radical nature to some of what was done in the 1980s by my predecessor. And I think that's just really cool. Building on that legacy is really cool. And now that sort of homeless shelter that started as Hill's Place in the basement now is sort of a giant network, really, that is taking care of the unhoused in a huge radius. Really, it's not just about an Evanston thing. So and they're really the only game in town on suburban North Shore stuff, North Suburban, uh, outside Chicago, to give care to and to provide shelter for the unhoused. So I think that that's a really cool legacy, and they're still there. They're still there in the basement, and we're still. They actually have offices in another wing of our church, so we still get to have a rich relationship there, even though they're their own 501(c)(3) now.
I love though that they were willing to go, okay, well, council said no. Well, we're gonna find a way around that and let's just let's just do it this way. And
Yeah,
and and that they were willing to take
yeah.
that.
It's just the imagination, right? Like to be able
Yeah.
to imagine, like, okay, they said no. Who cares? We're going to do it this way. And let's see if they step in there. I doubt they will. Because, I guess what I talk about, the book is about the sanctuary movement in the 1980s, right? Part of what just a point of connection is like part of what the sanctuary movement relied on, part of what they relied on doing the prayer services is that police don't like to go into houses of worship and take people out of them. It's just, it's spoken and unspoken taboo. And so that sort of plays into both of
Right.
those issues. It really was helpful.
So, for those who don't know what the sanctuary movement is, do you want to give like an explanation of
Sure.
what
So the
that is?
sanctuary movement in the 1980s was this network of congregations. It was an interfaith affair. There were Protestants, there were Catholics, there were Unitarian Universalists, there were Jewish congregations that participated in this sanctuary movement. And what it did is it took what they called refugees, but were often political activists who were wanted to come to the United States and also continue some political activism too. It's more complex than just a sort of a refugee thing. But from places in Central America, we're talking about Guatemala, um, and 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 come to the United States and receive sanctuary and sort of asylum against
Okay.
the wishes of because the current Reagan administration was denying asylum. So to folks to Central American refugees and asylum seekers
Mm.
who were coming here. The other place that people come from is El Salvador. That was the other place. So
Okay.
it was really Guatemala and El Salvador make up the big chunk here. And the Reagan administration was approving something like 1% of asylum cases at the time for this group because who was in power was supported by our government. So if you allow asylum cases through, you're basically saying that government isn't functioning, and we're giving it money, and we're
Mm.
supporting it. So that can't be true. Uh, Definitely, they were willing to take asylum cases from left wing governments in Central and Latin America, but not from conservative governments propped up by the Reagan administration. So these congregations took and gave housing. Sometimes it was in a church or a house of worship in some way. Sometimes it was an apartment connected to it. Sometimes it was in a parsonage. There are a lot. There's actually no one way that would be a majority to do it. And so, against the wishes, of course, illegally, provided. And there was one high profile trial that took place of people, and so they provide housing. The person would speak, about what is actually going on in their country of origin, which was not really getting out into the news. Is true. So it's an alternative sort of news source in some ways too, and continue some of their activism in the United States. So these congregations, or hundreds of them, had someone come through. There was also something called the Underground Railroad. Where people were made it to Canada, or were doing stops, and sometimes there were speaking tours. There were a lot of different ways to do it. There were caravans. But really, it was I would say it was both. It wasn't really about immigration. A lot of people, the new sanctuary movement is about immigration, but the sanctuary movement in the 1980s wasn't about immigration. It was about asylum policy, and it was about anti-Reagan activism. It
Mhm.
was about humanitarian efforts, and wanting to say people are suffering and we can do something about it. So I think that there were a lot of different ways that people got involved, but it wasn't really about immigration. That's the other thing.
Gotcha. But now it is. Now it's
Now, so the new sanctuary movement, and I pastor a church in the new sanctuary movement, and was one of the first churches that sort of signed on to that in 2014. And we've had a family there in our church, and the new sanctuary movement is really about immigration. So it
okay.
is really about pushing for immigration reform. And so they're different. They're same strategy, but they're applied to a different political issue.
Okay. So if it comes to it, these churches are saying if if there is no other option, like they could live in the
Right,
church.
and that we're going to protect you from being deported in some way, because again, there's
Okay.
this that that immigration officials don't want to enter a church and take someone out. So this again relying on this sort of special privilege that churches and the houses of worship generally enjoy in the United States.
Okay. Okay. Wow. I'm learning a lot today. I mean, that's a good thing. And so you guys also you have a family, you said, in
Hmm.
the church is supporting. Awesome. Wow. This is awesome. Um, why aren't more churches doing this? Are they afraid?
Why are more? It's kind of hard to get connected. Honestly, I'm not sure more churches should do it because it just depends what the level of support is. I've seen in some good models where many different congregations come together and do it, and that can be really effective. It's a lot for one congregation to do, and
Okay.
most congregations are not set up that well to sort of do this. So there are, but in desperate circumstances, it can be good. But generally, folks who work with the undocumented community and have that expertise are better
Okay.
placed, I think. So you're making a big stand. You're saying like we're not, when you do it, you're critiquing a particular policy. It gets political. You got to be sort of aligned with that criticism that you're going to give on that
Yeah.
sort of thing. It could tear congregations apart. And the book is somewhat about like maybe they're not so good at it, and I think that's that's a big part of the book.
So the book you wrote all comes out of, is it your experience with the new sanctuary movement? What is the book
Okay,
about?
yeah. So the book is mainly about the sanctuary movement in the 1980s. So that
Okay.
I interviewed the big thing that it does that not a lot of other pieces of work have done is that it interviews not just white activists, but also interviews recipients of sanctuary. So the people who were there. And so I tracked down and I interviewed 30, 15 activists, 15 folks who received sanctuaries. It was pretty evenly split, and learned what that experience was like. And one of the things that I learned in that is that you know I wanted to think theologically about what does it mean for white activists to sort
Mm.
of play this role, and
Yeah.
also for good meaning liberal religious white activists to also control your housing and to and
Mhm.
to and to want you to be sort of an ideal refugee as opposed to if you had for instance most of the recipients I talked to had been really powerful trade union activists, for instance, or
Mm.
indigenous rights activists in their native country, in their countries of origin, and there wasn't a lot of room uh, um, for talking about some of that activism. So, for instance, so there's a couple of the indigenous folks, the Mayan community that came here, wanted to talk about a 500-year legacy and history of colonialism. That all of this is sort of bound up together. But white activists in the sanctuary movement didn't really want to hear about that. So I think that it is some of those things that I talk about in the book. That there's friction, there's tension, and there's a limit. There's not. Sometimes it can be invisible to white activists, and so to make sure that I'm not just saying, "Oh, I know best." I wrote a
Mm.
chapter also that's an autoethnographic chapter that is about my experience being a white pastor of a new sanctuary movement church and how easy it is to get caught in these traps. I think that sanctuary itself that makes it a little that has great promise, but
Yeah.
also a lot of pitfalls. And for me, thinking about the movement, I was sort of in love with it, right? Fell in love with it in my MDiv program, and I thought I did a congregational history of a congregation in Massachusetts on how they did the sanctuary movement and their participation,
Mm.
and did archival research. I interviewed people, and I was like, okay, I love it. I want to do this, and I want to do it in a bigger scale. But it was a great test run for me, and part of what I loved about it as a progressive white pastor is like here are these progressive white pastors and congregations doing really good stuff that I can identify with. And so, and I sort of lionized it. And as I came to be more aware that whiteness and white supremacy is also a part of liberal and spaces that I love in my own ministry, that became possible to sort of say, okay, so whiteness is important. So the subtitle of this book, Sanctuary and Subjectivity, is thinking theologically about whiteness in sanctuary
Mm.
movements. So about the ways that whiteness and white supremacy sort of uh, define the contours of what it's like to practice sanctuary, I would say. And my own ministry. And so it's not just like I know better, I did the research and you should have done it this way. It's much more if there is critique in the book, it's self-critique, and so it's I think being open to that is really important. And so that's the first chapter. So before you get any of the like this and you will read some messed up things. I do want to say that it's written
Yeah.
in a style that everyone can enjoy. It's not too complicated. But you will read some things that might astonish, in my experience, and I was astonished when I encountered them. But before you read some of the things that astonish you, you're going to encounter me, the author, really wrestling with whiteness and white supremacy in my own ministry, and I think that that was important for me.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think that's incredibly important for us to do. I mean, where even if you can make that beginning step. I mean, I grew up American Baptist, but we were all white. I mean, in the middle of cornfield in Indiana,
Mm,
and Jesus was obviously blonde hair, blue eyed, and all of those things. But for you to even like go be able to grasp, welcome in, go, well, they might be right that Jesus isn't blonde
mhm.
haired, blue eyed, that, oh, and Egypt, and oh, and why would a white family go hide amongst brown people because they would stick out? I mean, when
Yeah.
Herod's looking to,
Jesus definitely wasn't white, and I
right,
think that like, that's probably a lot of people's first sort of like, "Oh, wow." A lot
right,
of what I've been told about race and racialization and faith has to be untangled somehow. Yeah.
right. And I think if you could make that first step, that makes step two maybe a little bit easier, but because step one is so huge, undoing what you've always known.
And I think like the other thing too that I would say that's really important about this, and it's important for people in ministry, it's important in people in their daily lives, and it's important for scholars, and it's important for activists, is to divorce and to sort of try to tease apart the difference between intent and result. And because everybody
Mm,
intends to do lots of really good stuff, but that intention is not in itself an excuse or an absolution from the damage caused. And I think that that's really important. Guilt is not useful. I'm not talking like let's be guilty all the time about X, Y, or Z, but I am saying that like there's intent, and intending to do a good thing doesn't doesn't absolve you of a result that results in harm. And I think this is in particular white folks have trouble disentangling these two. And the book is also a little bit of a disentangling. Everybody in there is cool, in the sense that like they're doing good work, they're thinking, oh, I want to stand up for the vulnerable. I want to do it. A lot of them say, I want to do it because Jesus is a big part of it. Okay, cool. I get that. At the same time, what do we do with the harm that's caused to people who are recipients in sanctuary? And the two are, I'm not saying that one's not important. Intent's important, but it's not absolution. It's not a get out of jail free card from wrestling with the harms that are really done and caused.
that's yeah. That I mean, really, that's mind. It. I mean, not that it shouldn't be. I mean, it should not be mind blowing, but yet it is. Like
Right.
the intent.
No, and I
Um,
think it is
yeah,
and it's easy to pay lip service too. But like when we get into situations when we're like, I really wanted to do the good thing, but that's not what happened. It can be harder. Can be
yeah.
harder. And I think that there's like so in that first chapter, one of the things that I do in addition to sort of recounting some stuff is I write for researchers, but also for people who are in scenarios. I guess there's this uh, Jesuit tradition of the examen, or there's
Mm,
the Ignatian examen that's supposed to help you sort of take an inventory of yourself and your actions throughout the day. And I wrote like a white supremacy examine that you can do. Like it's a spiritual practice, and it's one that I began to use when I was doing research as I saw it, because it's important to be open to that criticism. It's important to be
mm,
open to evaluation of yourself, and being open to that is I think that that's a spiritual discipline too. It's not perhaps only a spiritual discipline, but it has a spiritual aspect to it.
And I mean, and we don't have to pretend that being open is easy, because it's not. And
No.
that confrontation that you have to have with yourself, where you go, this is who I was, or this is who I was, but by the grace of God, I'm not still that person. However, I've made messes along.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So with the book, you said that it could be read really by anybody, not just
Yeah,
those
I don't
in.
think I use too much jargon at all. I mean, it's an
Okay.
academic monograph. It's published and it's to advance knowledge in a specific way. But I'd say 95% of the book is just very understandable if you want a history of, in some ways, if you want to think about the sanctuary movement and think about whiteness, it's a great book. But also, it's just for people who want to think about, oh, how do you do justice and and activism as a white pastor, as a white layperson, as a white person in general. What are some of the pitfalls in doing that? I think it's a good book for thinking about that, and it's a good book, honestly, for thinking what are the limits of white allyship? What are the limits of what is possible through white leadership? And I think it
Mm,
talks a lot about that. That there are limits. And part of the thing that the sanctuary movement in the 1980s made a pretty big mistake on, and that the new sanctuary movement fixed in a lot of ways, but maybe not completely, was that there was that there's much more recipient of sanctuary leadership. So there was
mm,
not a lot of leadership by recipients of sanctuary in the sanctuary movement in the 1980s. It was a lot of white people making a lot of decisions and speaking for. And I think that's was addressed, although some scholars have a lot of critiques of the new sanctuary movement and how they did that too.
mm.
But I'm not a
I was gonna,
scholar of the new sanctuary movement, and that's intentional, just because I
yeah.
think that there are undocumented scholars who could do that work better than I am. I felt okay with the sanctuary movement in the 1980s since it happened before I was born. That if someone hasn't written about it yet, then that feels like I definitely can write about that, and I think that's true.
I was gonna ask you what you learned, but I feel like that would be that entire first chapter that you're talking about.
Mm.
So, um, right? I mean, really, is that what that
Yeah,
what you
no, it is about learning. It has an arc, to it, and it talks about the possibilities of learning, and
what
talks
about
about
what
the
you learned about
possibilities.
yourself? What about
Oh
you?
well,
Yeah. Or
well,
is
I think
that
that
that first chapter?
yeah, I think that's true. It definitely it's about me understanding myself and my role as a pastor, the power. So it's a book about power. Is
Mm,
another way to think about the book. It's a book about power for sure.
mm.
And power, like, it's not a bad word. Like, power over is
No,
generally
no.
bad, but power happens everywhere. If we're thinking, we don't have to look to Foucault or something to think about power. Most of us think about power, and it requires power to
Mhm.
do most things. But it's just about how do you think about power in productive ways, and how do you move on from power that's not productive. It's that kind of book for sure.
Or how do you use that power to lift others up? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Um,
And how do you step back? Because I think that white activists
mm,
and white pastors and white congregations are perhaps not so good at stepping back. So lift up, and then can you step back and actually be led by? I think that that didn't happen a lot in the sanctuary movement in the 1980s. I don't think it happens a lot now. Um, and I think that that's worth some introspection.
yeah. No, that's huge. Is really no. I think you're absolutely right. That is a difficult thing to do, and that whole power control, who's doing, stepping back and going, you know what, this is not my, this is not my. I mean, I'll walk with you, but this is not. I don't need to be first. I don't need
Hmm.
to take all that. Yeah, I think I'd like to read this book. I'm sure it has. I think I'm sure it has a lot to teach me.
Well, the good news is that as a scholarly book, it's very affordable, and the paperback came out with the hardback, so it's 22, $23, and then the PDF, if you want to buy an ebook version, is something like 18, which for scholarly books is really good.
And folks, we will be sure to put the links for Amazon and Bloomsbury in the show notes, so that if you would like to get a copy of the book, you can get the book as well. I want to be sure that I ask you the joy question, because I almost forgot it last time. I got so excited about talking about somebody else's book that I like totally forgot. And I was like, wait, back up. We can't forget the joy question. So, like,
Sure.
what's the thing that brings you joy?
Yeah, joy for me. So, like, I think that I get a lot of joy from writing. So I think that that's really, I do like to write a lot. I write a variety of things, right? And it's not always political. It's not always academic. I do these things for Sojourners that came out last month's issue. That's like a review of Good Omens 2, which is it's a TV show and talked about faith and Good Omens 2, for instance. And so I like to do culture stuff. But I really get a lot out of writing. I really do like to write. I think
Mm.
it's an important part of the fun of the book was that I got to write, right? So and now it lives in the world and other people can engage with it and think about it. So for me, I get a lot of joy out of writing. I get a lot thinking through something, coming to a conclusion, trying to advocate for it in the best way possible. For me, that's all a lot of fun. Um, More personally, I mean, I get a lot of joy out of my family and being able to hang out with my daughter, and she's learning to read, and that's always really fun.
Mm, you think you have another book in you?
Sure, yeah. There's already a couple in the works, so
Oh,
we'll see. I'm not going to do a single author book for a while, probably. But
okay.
I have a couple collaborations that are coming out. So Dr. Neighbors and I have written a manuscript, and we're hoping that will come out soon. And my wife, Reverend Dr. Anna Piela, and I are writing a book about Islamophobia and what the church can do to
Ooh.
counteract that. So there's projects on the horizon and some another sort of collaboration on reparations and faith.
And I don't have to tell you, but I think your wife is pretty fabulous. You
Me
know,
too.
one of my colleagues and
Me too.
coworkers. But yes, I know you think that, but I'm just throwing that out there. Um,
Yeah.
so I would I'm excited about like the books that you have coming, because I think those are, I mean, the Islamophobia one especially, like that's huge. But I might need you to uh introduce me to Reverend Dr. Michael Neighbors, so
I
that
think I can do that. Yeah. We'll see.
yeah, and so that we hear his story too, because I mean it's important. It needs to be told, and this is this is wow. This is what I love about doing this, is like you learn something every single time, and if I don't, then I'm not paying attention. I mean,
Mm.
yeah. So I have a great appreciation for you and the work you're doing, and I'll just say, um, Michael Ware also sings your praises. I mean, um, he is a great advocate for you and your ministry there. So um,
Yeah, he's a dear friend. Yeah, we're in a clergy group together. I love the guy.
yeah. So keep doing the great work, and I can't wait to see what's next, and um, look forward to reading it all. So I
Cool.
also,
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me.
yeah,
For sure.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on here, and I'm gonna find some of these links like the Sojourners. I can't read it yet because that's on my list to do on my vacation time next week,
Okay.
is to
Yeah.
watch season 2. I haven't seen
Oh, you
season
can't
2
read it
yet.
yet then. No, it's very good.
No,
It's very good.
no. I've not seen season 2 yet, but that's the plan for next week. So,
Perfect.
but I will still put the links down there for folks to read it.
Sure,
So
sure. You can
thank you
probably
so
just put
much.
the link to the author page because that has all
Yeah,
the stuff I wrote for them too. That would be
yeah.
cool.
Thanks so much for being part of this craziness. It
I
is
thought
such
it went good. I thought it was a good
yeah.
conversation. So
And we thank everybody for watching.